Good morning. This is Alan from Sound Training. I'm here with my partner Dan. We're going to talk a little bit about our company, why we do what we do, and how a lot of the different training in emergency services, public safety, and security can be brought together into one system.
Good morning. This is Dan Sinisi, partner with Sound Training Group, here with Alan. Um, Today we're going to discuss, as Alan mentioned, um, why we got into the training aspect of the industry, the security industry, and public safety. But before we get into that, we just want to give you a little bit of background on ourselves. Um, I have currently just about over 25 years of security and public safety experience, and including the fire service. Most of my career has been spent in healthcare security, and currently, as of today, in the instructing sector of public safety and security.
Well, I've got about a little over 25 years now, almost 26 in public safety, combined between communications, working in a 911 center, fire service as an EMT, and in security. And one of the things I noticed is security doesn't seem to take training as, I don't want to say as seriously, but as much of a necessity as the rest of public service. There are some states that don't require any training for security, but here in Connecticut, where I'm based out of, or where our company is based out of, we have a very short class that you take and no refresher training. Everybody else in public safety has to go for some kind of refresher training.
So Alan, what do you think about our current state of our training generally, not specific to Connecticut, but overall? Where are we going? And that's what we want to talk about for a couple minutes, is where we're actually going as far as training. Uh, there are a lot of incidents that have occurred, particularly in the past year or so, where police officers and security officers as well, with issues with use of force and just basically issues with the training levels of our security officers and the status where they should be compared to our public law enforcement.
Well, I think the training is going to increase for a couple of reasons. One, security is getting involved in areas that we didn't used to get involved with very much. Uh, Security is taking on much more of a role in not quite the public sector, but working alongside the public sector. We're becoming much more of from being a counterpart to being a partner with the public sector law enforcement in a lot of areas. The other thing is liability. Security companies, because they're private companies, deal with liability a lot more than the public sector. We don't have the benefit of immunity or some of the indemnifications that the public sector has. But we're seeing that with less training, we're seeing a lot of cases where there are criminal charges or large civil cases with large payouts about security actions.
Well, Alan, just like you mentioned a few moments ago, uh, law enforcement, public law enforcement, um, when they get hired for the job, um, in many cases they have to attend a post-certified police academy, where they spend anywhere from 4 to 6 months in the academy itself, and then usually 1 year probationary status with a field training officer before they're able to patrol and do their other responsibilities. However, security is a different animal with this regard. In most cases, security gets the very minimal that's required by the state that they're in, if there's any requirement. There's a handful of states out there that actually don't have any kind of requirement for security, and that becomes a problem because um, you just can't slap on a uniform and a badge and a gun in a lot of cases, and expect these security officers to be able to perform their responsibilities and duties without the proper level of training. Um, it just does not work well, as we can see in some of these incidents. I from Connecticut, I can assure you, um, many officers don't get the level of training that they really need. Um, there's a lot of liability out there, although in the employers and contract agencies require the bare minimum to be able to be licensed and placed on the job.
Well, I think the other factor that we have to look at is officer safety. Law enforcement will talk to you about officer safety, officer safety, officer safety. They will dwell on it. They will beat it into you. This is officer safety. And in security, we go, all right, here's the site. It's 10,000 square feet. You're alone. You don't have a radio because even if you did, there's no one on the other end. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And by the way, there have been 100 burglaries here last year. But yeah, just go around with a flashlight and make sure the warehouse is safe. That's security, unfortunately. There's a lot of places. I worked loss prevention at a store where you're alone. Your backup isn't coming unless you're calling the police. Your supervisor is covering an entire county and could be upwards to an hour away. So you're on your own to handle whatever happens. And you're expected to do this based on training and experience. Well, what if you're a new guy just starting in the company, just starting in the security field? You have no experience. And what if you're in a state that doesn't require any training? You have no training. So what are you depending on? I'd like to say common sense, but generally the courts don't accept that as an excuse. Why did you shoot this person? Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Well, we've had a lot of incidents. Unfortunately, a lot of them violent. Um, we've had some mass shootings, workplace violence incidents, carjackings, and the like. And unfortunately, many security officers are not equipped nor trained in these areas. Um, we have to keep one thing in mind. We have to get away from the watchman mentality. Um, Today's security officers are expected to know a lot more. When you see someone with a uniform and a badge and an emergency situation comes up, that person is going to go to that officer and look for guidance and assistance. And he's going to be expected to know what to do. Um, the way that society perceives security is unfortunately one where the security officer appears not to know too much except what he has to do on the job as far as the routine things. Um, but we have to get away from that and we have to go more training. Police officers, fire, and EMS professionals are constantly training. They don't just have their initial training and put on the badge and uniform and say, okay, let's call it a day. I'm ready. And for the next 30 years or so, I'm good to go. They're constantly training. Trends are changing. And security has to play catch up. We have to really catch up with what law enforcement and in some cases fire and EMS do. One important thing to keep in mind is that security officers and public safety officers have become the first true responders on their sites and properties. It may make sense to know that, but from a security officer standpoint, if something were to happen, they are going to be the first responders, whatever the incident may be. It may be an assault, it may be a carjacking, it may be a fire, it could be workplace violence, a shooter incident. Security officers have to be prepared.
And it's funny when you mention the perception. Think about the public perception as portrayed in the media. We can all think about our favorite cop show as a kid. Whether it was Adam 12, Hill Street Blues, Chips. These were all shows that we watched, growing up. I also grew up watching Emergency, which was about firefighters and paramedics, and to this day you'll find many people that will tell you they got into the fire service because they watched Emergency as a kid. But by and large, the majority of portrayals of police, fire, and to some extent EMS in the media is positive. Look at Chips. You had two guys that were the heroes. They actually made a point of almost never drawing their guns on that show. It was to show that the police could handle things without shooting people. It was a sign of the times coming out of it. Yes, there have been comedies. Yes, there have been a few, the Keystone Cops going back a days, or Barney Fife, but they're the exception, not the rule. Now you look at security. When was the last time you saw a movie or a TV show that had a security officer that wasn't a bumbling fool, a criminal, or somebody that couldn't get a real job? Look, I like the movie Armed and Dangerous, but in it you have John Candy, a guy who was fired from the police department for corruption, and Eugene Levy playing a defense attorney that was defending people he knew were guilty and was afraid of most of his clients. So they both said, hey, let's go work as security guards. Now they ended up as the heroes and at the end of the movie, and it was kind of lighthearted. But that movie would not have been, hey, I'm a failed attorney, hey, I'm a failed security officer, hey, let's go be cops. No one can even envision that movie. There have been the occasional comedies with firefighters, but by and large, you see firemen on TV or in the movies, and they're the heroes.
Well, it's funny we're talking about that. Years ago, when I worked in the healthcare facility, I started out as a security officer on the night shift, and I had a mentor. And my training consisted of 2 hours of orientation, which was required by all employees of the hospital, regardless of position. And then I got on-the-job training. And I can tell you, looking back, that the training that I received was, compared to today, nil. I had to learn everything pretty much on my own. Having risen through the ranks in the management, one of the first things I did was to get more training for my staff, my security staff. And I was able to get training for hazmat training, fire, first aid, all kinds of training, not only from the state, but from other company providers. And we made our department more valuable, not so much in a monetary sense, but more as a safety conscious department. And with that, we did get more respect, which is, I know, a big issue out there in talking to some security officers when they mentioned that they get absolutely no respect. And again, going back to public perception, if you're viewed as an individual who has very little training or education, they're going to look at that person as a person that's just a warm body at a post that's punching the clock in and out. And as I mentioned before, we have to get away from that. We're not doing that anymore. 9/11 taught us a very valuable lesson with regards to security, and we just can't take anything for granted. I've been on sites where security officers are very lax. They don't know what's going on half the time, and actually had an individual tell me, I'm just here for a paycheck. And while that's what we all do, we also have to keep in mind officer safety and your surroundings. And your surroundings are very important, whether you're on or off duty. This applies to everybody. You have to know what's going on around you at all times. We can't be lax. We can't afford that anymore.
Well, there also are some positive public perceptions, and I've been working part-time in security because one of the things I want to do is make sure I keep fresh in the industry. And the other day, I'm standing there. Now, the site I'm working at, we're in a very formal-looking uniform, button-down shirt, badge, collar, brass. We actually wear campaign hats. We're definitely in uniform. We're definitely there for high visibility. This is security. And there's a father and his young son. And the kid looks up at me and goes, "Are you a policeman?" Now, I've had parents refer to me as a policeman when they tell their kids the policeman will take you away if you're bad. I've had parents also say he's not a policeman, he's just security. But what this father said was so awesome. Had he not been trying to get on an elevator and rushing to where he was going, I wanted to shake the guy's hand and say thank you very much. He looked right down at his son, looked at me, and said, he's not a policeman, he's a security guy. They're like policemen. They keep us safe when we're here shopping at the mall. That guy gets it. That's all I can say. That guy gets it. We don't find a lot of people saying, yes, this is a security officer, and yes, he's someone you should trust and be thankful that he's there.
And that's that's we don't usually hear stories like that, or at least I don't. Going back to perception, it all comes down to training, and no matter how you look at it, if you're not trained or well trained, the public will perceive that person as being just a Barney Fife, like Alan mentioned. We have to have a level of training post 9/11. We're still lagging in a lot of areas, and we need to really play catch up. I know law enforcement, fire, and EMS, they're all out there continually training. As a matter of fact, I spoke to a police officer friend of mine the other day, and he mentioned that he was taking 2 days off to go upstate and train with other police officers in certain tactics. And it's just to refresh what they would do on any given day. I'm a big believer in training, continual training, not just training once and it's done. You have to be trained continually, and to keep your skills sharp, to keep your mindset focused, you have to have that training. It's unfortunate that security officers are placed in a position where they get the very minimal of training and be expected to know everything, to be able to handle everything and do their jobs correctly. And a lot of the fault cannot be placed on the security officers. They get these jobs, they're placed on these sites, and they're expected to know everything. And that's just not today's world.
Well, the other thing is we have to look at where our industry can improve on this, but we have to want to improve. One of the things in Connecticut a couple of years ago, we had got a new governor, and he wanted to streamline the state government. And one of the things he wanted to do was combine the state police academy and the state fire academy together under one organizational umbrella. And I'll tell you what, there was a lot of objection from the firefighters saying we don't want the police in charge of our training, and from the police saying we don't want the fire department in charge of our training. We do what we do, we're separate. And to a certain extent, I can understand that. In security, we always have somebody else in charge of our training. Here in Connecticut, it's the state police. In California, it's the Department of Consumer Affairs. You don't even have a law enforcement component. It's just, well, you're a company and we regulate all companies, so basically the same people that are deciding what the vacuum cleaner salesman has to do is deciding what security has to do. Now, California has more training requirements than Connecticut, so they may be doing a good thing there. But when you start to look at these things, we measure our training in hours in security, and police and fire, although they could tell you how many hours, they measure their training in months or days. And I think that's part of the problem. The other problem is we have to look at what we're actually training in. I've seen far too many security classes that don't actually address security. In Connecticut, which is where most of my experience lies, we're required to know a section on constitutional law. Now, the Constitution is very important. It's the law of the land. It's one of our founding documents in this country. And I certainly would not say not to cover the Constitution. But so much of what the Constitution is protecting the people from the public sector. I think we could probably cut the amount of time we spend on constitutional law in half, and yet there's a section on emergency response and patrol procedures that has to cover everything from car accidents to bomb threats to fires, and that's half an hour less than the section on constitutional law.
It's funny. Um, in speaking to the many security officers out there, one of the questions I always get, and it's amazing, is that from security officers generally is, why do I need more training? Why do I need to take more courses or practicals when the state requires, for example, in Connecticut, 8 hours? And in some states, like I mentioned before, there are no requirements. Why do I need this extra training? Where is it going to get me? Well, my first response to that is your safety and the safety of others you're protecting. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be trained. Your mind has to be trained in performing CPR, for example. Your mind has to be trained. What do you do in case of a fire? What do you do in case of an active shooter? Now, nobody's expecting specific responses, but generally, security officers are placed in a position where they're going to be the first responders on their sites. And a lot of these officers mentioned to me, well, where's it going to get me? Well, I can sit here and validate maybe 20 reasons, but just to name a few, aside from your own safety and the safety of others, um, if you plan on advancing your career, particularly in the security industry, it's good to have uh, the education and training, as well as the possibility of a college degree, which in a lot of cases is not necessary, but good to have. Um, you have to show your employer you're serious about your commitment um, to your job and your industry. Let's face it, if we don't get the training, you're probably not going to move up very quickly, if at all. And that's just being honest. In my experience, again, having started in security as a security officer, um, I was fortunate enough to have a manager who really cared about me and made sure I got all the training that I wanted. And that worked out very well for me. And to this day, I still thank him, and I'm still in touch with him every now and again. Um, but I tell every officer, you just can't get enough training. And the most important part of the training is just the continual training, whether it be once a month, once every quarter. Sometimes I think once a year is too long, in different aspects. And unfortunately, we're just not getting it.
I think one of the other things we have to look at is what the subjects that we're teaching are. Uh, I used to know a guy. He's an instructor. He was one of my instructors here in Connecticut. He's now out in the Midwest. And I won't use the exact term that he described WMD as. I'll clean it up a little bit and say that WMD stand for Who's Making Dollars. We tend to think of this that we've got to do active shooter, we've got to do this, we've got to do bomb threats, and we do have to do those things. But one of the best classes I took was at the local community college, a certificate program that was 4 classes, and one of them was just getting into some scenario based security stuff and security planning. And one of the practical things we did is simulated you're the guard at an office building, you're sitting in the lobby, it's just you, you're not armed, your job is normally to check people in and out, maybe accept the odd UPS package and stuff like that, and all of a sudden in comes a guy you know. He's worked there for years, except he was fired 2 days ago, and he is coming in to see the CEO. He's demanding to see the CEO. He doesn't have valid employee credentials. He's not there as an employee anymore, and he's pulling them. Well, you know me, you know who I am. And the whole thing was, can you keep him from getting in? What do you do? At what point do you have to call for backup? At what point do you have to call the police? How are you dealing with this person? Can you de-escalate him, his attitude? That is probably more security officers are going to deal with that ex-employee coming to the building than they will deal with Al Qaeda showing up, and flying an airplane into a shopping mall. I'm not saying it won't happen. I hope to hell it doesn't happen, but most of the time, what we're dealing with are trespassers, are shoplifters, are belligerent people. And I think we need to begin focusing on that. And the basic class doesn't even tell you how to check doors and do rounds. But it will tell you about a lot of stuff that we could probably compact some of that stuff, expand other areas, and of course we really should be expanding the hours. 8 hours is simply not enough for basic training.
You know, we have to, as an industry, and in particular the frontline officers, we have to begin to look at ourselves as professionals, and that's what we are. For those of you that have been in the field for a number of years, know that at this point you're a professional. You've been on the job for so many years, and it's time to professionalize the industry. Um, and the only way to do that is to have that training. And let's be honest, we have to change the perception of society. That's a big one. And I have a lot of officers in speaking with me say they don't get respect and they don't get they're looked down and things of that nature. And unfortunately, in some cases, that's true. But again, we have to be professionals in what we do. And how do we be professionals? We do our job correctly. We train. Um, we ask for the proper equipment, um, and we don't badmouth the industry as a whole, or even your job. And I know many of you out there have issues with your job, just like any other industry. But we just have to keep in mind that as professionals, we have to move forward and do the best that we can. Our big task as an industry is to really change that perception, to show people we are professionals. We're not just a warm body on a site that has no clue of what's going on.
I think to wrap things up here, we do definitely need to change the perception. We have to start with our own perception. I saw a security officer from a different company the other day on a site I was working, comes in, his shirt's untucked, his pants are loose and hanging down. This guy was an armored car driver, and his holster's kind of hanging off the loose belt. Made me kind of a little itchy to be there. And so we need to fix our own perception of ourselves and then work on the public perception. And we can hopefully get together and make this industry better. I think we have the potential to improve what we need to improve here.
Yeah, I think we do. And in the coming months and years, we hope to really, not only our company, but others out there, try to improve our industry, try to professionalize our security staff, and change that perception so we can move forward. There's always going to be obstacles, just like any other industry, but we can overcome them together. And as long as we have the proper training and guidance, we can accomplish that. So we want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope everyone stays well, be safe out there. You can always reach Sound Training Group on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're also on LinkedIn. And we're currently working on a website that's currently being renovated, and that should be up shortly. But if you need access to us anytime, you can call us at 203 355 3623.
All right, thank you very much for listening, and that's going to wrap up what we're talking about today.
Have a great day, everyone.